So today I am joined by Andy Crossley, who is director at the Oakland Group. Andy, thank you for joining me via Zoom. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's nice to speak to you finally, because you and I have been trying to make a date for this for well before all this coronavirus situation kicked off. And I do have to say I'm really pleased that we could make it happen, because I think the questions I had for you are just as, if not more relevant for the topics of today and the kind of challenges we're
Indeed.
facing.
Yeah.
So obviously this is unprecedented. I'm sure everybody is sick of hearing the word unprecedented, but it is. Do you see any opportunities in what we're going through at the moment?
Yeah, it's been a weird time for us. I'd consider we're very fortunate. So we've not had to really stop anything. We've not had to primarily slow anything down, and we're actually sort of facing into a recruitment issue and resourcing issue at the moment, which is interesting. And as much as I sit there and sort of complain about it, many people would say, well, that's a fortunate position to be in. So I think we've seen actually quite a difference with our customers. We're fortunate in that our clients are mixed sectors. So, there's not been one particular sector and that's been hit, for example. Some have slowed down and some have sped up. So I think it's been a testament to having a broad portfolio of clients and work. But we have seen a number of people that we've been in early conversations with prior to this. This is where we've seen things speed up or slow down. So I think it's given some people breathing space to have a think, sort of especially around what we do in terms of getting more from your data and making use of that. And that's not just the buzzword bingo of AI and machine learning and all that stuff, but actually quite fundamental things. So with worlds slowing down for a number of clients, they've been able to get their hands on so architecturally, are we doing the right thing? So we've got data in the right place. Is it of good enough quality to actually generate that insight? And do we need to spend a bit of time getting our hands, our heads around that? Data governance as well. Now is a time when things have slowed down a bit, and there's not the rapid push for, say, hitting your next target. Is this now a time to get our house in order a bit? So there's a real mix. There's a few clients that have got quite hard targets still within this year that are then needing help to drive more analytical solutions, which we're looking to help with. So I think there's been a mix. I think it's probably raised more questions for companies about how they operate.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's going to be really, really interesting to see what the next phase is for companies.
Well, we've seen a number of managers within our clients actually use the opportunity to drive for more answers from their data. So I think those that sort of rely on gut feel, or you can, I don't know, to cartoon it, sort of, I can walk around the factory and see what's going on. I can't do that anymore. So I want my operational dashboard to tell me what's going on, or I need this to tell me what's going on. So I think that's highlighted to people the power of data when you can't physically eyeball stuff. And a number of our bigger clients have been, or I guess, a more traditional sort of engineering type organizations, and certainly at the heart of their operations have grown up as people who go and walk around with the clipboard and eyeball what's going on, and they can't do that any longer. And I think the only other area we've seen many businesses have put in like Herculean efforts to get their teams to continue to work from home, where they might have done it very ad hoc before. I think that's left businesses probably my hypothesis is there's a number of businesses out there that have been then left with a bit of a sticky plaster approach to moving things into the cloud or changing the architecture to enable a lot of that. Whether that's sustainable or the right thing longer term for that business, we're starting to have conversations about, well, we've done the cloud migration in 3 days. We don't know whether we've done it correctly or whether it's going to not fall over in 6 months' time. Can you come and help? So yeah, it's been a real mix actually. I think we are quite fortunate, but yeah, fingers crossed.
It's so interesting watching the conversation evolve, isn't it? Do you think it's forced you to get more, you and the business to get more creative and innovative?
It's forced. So it's forced a number of things, I think, for us. It's put a heavier burden on using different communication channels to interact with our team. So you could normally rely on, again, walking around the office and 5-minute chat here and a
Mm.
coffee, walk to the coffee machine here and there and so on and so forth. And you just can't do that anymore. I think what that leads to is an increased conscious effort on managers to put that effort in and time in to support their staff. It's led to certainly me looking at some of our processes where the cracks in some processes you can avoid or you can get round when you're physically together. And I think they've been exacerbated a little bit when you're all removed from each other. So things like being really clear on roles and responsibilities when you mobilize a project. And rather than just assuming everybody knows what the project manager does, let's actually just spell it out what the project manager does, and are we all happy with that? So it's led to a bit of an effort internally to tidy some of that up, and that can only be a good thing. I think personally, the one thing I've noticed on myself is being trying to be more aware of how you use those comms tools. So I'm sure you're aware of Slack as a tool these days. And it's not a substitute for this type of conversation, face to face and even a telephone conversation. And I think it's easy to get dragged into spitting out multiple Slack messages to your team members to check they're okay, and then thinking that that's enough. And when they've got the same from other members of the team or other managers, and it becomes just a "yeah, I'm fine" reply. And actually, if you were sat there with them over a coffee and eyeballing them and again, the sort of physical response might tell you a different picture. And so I think that the reflection for me is to not use that as a substitute right now. It does place more time on setting up calls, and certainly even still, my days are almost back-to-back Teams calls.
They're exhausting, aren't they? They're absolutely intense.
Yeah, and you have got to, like, even looking at you now, I've got to concentrate on the facial cues and all the rest of it that you sort of take for granted. And I don't know, it's whether you're just more used to absorbing that in a physical environment when you're together. When there's 10 or 20 of you on a Zoom call and you're trying to like look at every thumbnail picture on the screen to make sure everybody's paying attention. It is exhausting. So yeah, it's highlighted areas where we can improve internally. It's also, I think, just on a personal reflection, made me think more consciously about how you communicate and how people respond to that type of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually one of the most common topics that's coming up in the coaching I'm doing at the moment. I've kind of in fact, I wrote an article on it yesterday about virtual imposter syndrome, because you haven't got that that body language so much. There is a physical division.
Yes.
And yet you're absolutely right. We do have to evolve. As a sort of side point to that, we had a lovely chat before we started recording, and your kids popped in.
Yes.
I called it an equalizer, but what was your term for the?
So yeah, I think it's created a leveler. It's
yes.
built in a weird level of humour to most of our conversations with everything from clients to team members. And having a senior member of our client shouting on the screen but being on mute, and all of us shouting back at him telling him he's on mute, but when he came off mute explaining that he was actually shouting at his kids, hence why he went on mute. And that happens all the time, and I think it's like I said to you, it's like an icebreaker, like a built-in icebreaker, I think.
Absolutely.
Conversations.
Yeah.
So you can go and talk to quite senior people and it's just accepted. We've all got kids or families running around in the background, and as long as it generally doesn't disturb, I think it works quite well. I think it also helps with, where you can, it helps with keeping meetings down, as in time. I think my day has been filled with more meetings, but I think typically when you're face to face, you can easily fill a 2-hour meeting, whereas when you're back to back or you've got multiple teams, it's like, well, we can probably fit that into an hour or less. So it's certainly made us challenge a bit. Do we need a whole day to do a sales and ops monthly meeting? No, we need 2.5 hours and we'll rattle through stuff. So it gets you a bit more focused, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. Have you heard about, did you see the article Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn, put up a few weeks ago about needing buffering just because of that, the back-to-back meetings?
Yes.
I don't know about you, but I can get to the end of the day and it's just absolute fatigue. It's so intense.
So one of our other directors has now forced himself that he has a minimum of half an hour between each call, and that half an hour he will get up and walk out of the office and go somewhere in the house or into the garden, or you forget, don't you, that there's usually a natural break built into these things in the office environment. So you might, whether it's walking from one meeting room to another, or going and grabbing a coffee and you actually step outside, or whatever it is, the lack of natural breaks built into the day, and you just sat down all day. I've missed a lot of the walking that I'll have done from the car park to the office or whatever. I'm nearly at the stage where I've got to buy the in-flight DVT socks that you wear on the plane, just because I sit down too much these days. So I think it has changed a lot, and it forces you to think about some of the things you took for granted that build in. It's everything from thinking time to natural breaks.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've got, so as you can see, and as we've discussed, I'm in my garden shed quarters at the moment. I've got a little bench just out there, and I like to go out there and have a cup of coffee and just listen to the bird song, just to get some natural light apart from anything else. But absolutely, you need it.
Indeed.
So Andy, why don't you tell us a bit about you and your journey and how you got to be where you are today, if you would?
Yes. Okay. So not really a normal route, I guess, in many ways. So my career started after university, many moons ago now, and I joined a company called Syntegra, which at the time was a subsidiary of BT, and did their graduate scheme when I think it felt like graduate schemes were more of a thing than they are now, a bit, and progressed off that into a similar development program for consultants, and those two things combined were probably the best part of 5 years in BT. So at the time, BT had brought Syntegra back in house and created a sort of consulting arm that did everything. Well, did the sort of 3 pillars, I guess, that a lot of consultancies claim around technology, people, and process. And had a sort of strong career. BT was in a good place, and so I thought it'd be a really good idea to leave that and then set up on my own. So my second job out of university was my own business. I looked to, with a colleague at the time, take a lot of the learning that we'd done through our training and through some of the proposition areas that we were working in, and basically took that out and started to do our own version of it, which was mad at the time.
How old were you then?
So I would have been 24, I think.
Wow. Okay.
About maybe a little bit more. But my first client was HBOS. My second client was the Salford City Council, so one of the bigger ones in the sort of Greater Manchester area. So very fortunate. Sort of timing wise, initially was perfect. 3 years down the line, timing wise, was terrible. So the recession hit. HBOS had been bought by Lloyds, and all of that had gone Pete Tong. And basically councils stopped spending money. And so, and we were expecting our first child. So I had to make the very hard decision of walking away from my own business, and finding a way to go and earn a living, basically. So filled a bit of a gap by doing some contracting. Never personally been that fussed with doing that. I've always wanted to be part of something and build something.
Mm-hmm.
So I joined a small tech company to head up their consulting team, and this was a pretty small business at the time, focused on delivering like real-time information systems to like airports, transportation, and they did quite a lot in the telco space as well. Joined them, became part of their management team, and helped grow that business till the founders sold it. But through that journey, I learned a lot about tech delivery, but how you, I guess, to get the value for clients is a combination of the tech, but also an understanding of the business and business processes and people, and personalities and politics. You can have the fanciest bit of tech or the shiniest dashboard, but unless you can embed that and get people to use it, so what? So interestingly, at that time, I worked a lot with Neil Dunlop, who's now sort of one of the technology leaders at Infinity Works. So I learned a lot of him. He might not like me saying, but it was all good. And he led the tech team and I led the consulting team together. But yeah, that taught me a lot about running successful technology projects and what works and what doesn't work. But it also, that business became a bit more product focused, and I wanted to get back into sort of consulting and being a bit more client facing. So joined a company called Oakland, and at the time that business was very much still focused on its heritage. So Oakland, the company I work for now, 35 years old we are this year. I hasten to add, I've not been around for all that time.
Yeah, it's your 6-year anniversary, isn't it?
It is, yeah, almost to the day. So yeah, I think last week was my 6-year anniversary at Oakland, and tomorrow's my birthday, but I won't tell you that number. So yeah, Oakland's heritage is quite different, and it's grown up as a business primarily focused on Lean, Six Sigma, process improvement, pretty much helping businesses with like operational challenges and complex operational problems. And joined that really to get a bit more back into core consulting, and that's what they did. It was all based around that world. I quickly realized that actually what we were doing was not as much in favor. Businesses were often bringing that type of activity in house, but a lot of our conversations with clients were becoming much more data orientated. So to help me understand this process or to discover how we improve on this problem, actually you need to get your hands on the data. So effectively over the last 3 years, myself and the other directors have completely reinvented Oakland. So we've gone from being Oakland Consulting to we're now the Oakland Group, completely rebranded, restructured, and we've gone from primarily a team of managers that then delivered work through an associate pool, so contractors, to turn that on its head. And we've now got, so in the last 3 years, we've gone from a team of 1 to a team of 12 core team members based around our data propositions. So that's a mix of data scientists, data engineers, software engineers, etc., and technical consultants. And sort of largely still solve the same problems. So we still go into big, complex blue chip organizations and still solve operational challenges that are generally pretty complex. But now we do it with a bunch of really clever data people that day to day blow my mind. They run rings around me in terms of their technical knowledge. And yeah, so it's been quite nice to build off a heritage of 30 odd years. It's quite unusual for a small business to be around that long, and sort of reinvent ourselves for the future.
So just to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which really piqued my interest. My daughter always tells me off when I use this word, but it's niggle. What was your niggle at the age of 24 that convinced you that you could do it for yourself?
So I think there's two parts that for as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to run my own business. I think even as a kid, I always sort of had that in my mind.
Did you have role models or?
Not really. I think, well, not that I can remember anyway. I think when I was younger, sporting efforts, I tended to focus on individual sports as opposed to team sports. That was always a driver for me, and that's partly. So if I remember back, that's partly, if you win, you win, and if you don't, you've only got yourself to blame, sort of attitude. So there's a sort of direct result often with that. If you put the work in, you put the effort in, you see it. And
so
I think
quite comfortable with ownership then.
Yeah, but I think I've softened, as I've softened that attitude a bit in that. The reason Oakland are a success is because we have an awesome team around us. I couldn't do it on my own. The directors can't do it on their own. And actually, to grow a business, you need an amazing team of people that operate as a greater than the sum of the parts. I think it's very, very hard to do that as a complete sole trader, even as a much smaller business. I think I've recognised over the years, sort of know what you're good at, and then surround yourself with the people that are better at the other things you can't do. Don't try and do it all yourself. However, when you first set up, you do need to try and do it all yourself. So I've always had that urge to go and do it. I think it was one of those moments in time that just presented itself as now's the opportunity. So the reason I got HBOS is because I was working for them at BT. The client that I was working for day to day offered the opportunity for me to go back and keep doing what I was doing, but didn't want to pay BT day rate, basically. And it was one of those too good an opportunity to turn down. It didn't really faze me in terms of doing it. It was probably that sort of attitude that allowed me to push on and go, well, if it doesn't work, I'll go and do something else. And that didn't make me anxious or worried, really. It was only then when sort of responsibilities change. But I think I've generally dealt with that sort of risk and uncertainty pretty well over the years, and that doesn't go away when you're then a director or a manager of a slightly bigger business. It's the same. So yeah, I think that urge has always been there, and that was just the stars aligned, really.
I think that's really interesting. You call it the stars aligning, but from the work that I do, one of the key attributes I've seen of leaders and entrepreneurs is that there are very few opportunities, real golden opportunities, and the people that succeed are the ones that grab those with both hands and dive in.
Yeah.
I think it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a level of confidence to grasp it and run with it, and then be comfortable with that it might not work. I think that's the bit that's taken me much, much longer to be happy with.
Okay.
So when I had to walk away from, so our company was called Shoal. Interestingly, because it was about designing teams that work towards a common goal. So the idea of a shoal of fish all moving in the same direction, which took us ages to come up with a sensible name for that sort of stuff. But
that's the fun bit, though, right? Do you find that the fun?
Sort of looking back, designing business cards and logos and stuff like that was quite cool. But yeah, it took me a long time to get over having to walk away from my own thing that I built and not treat it as a failure. And that was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and personality and personal input to that, to then walk away from it when it's a very hard decision, when ultimately at the end of the day you've got to pay the bills.
Absolutely. And just to give you a bit of context, I've been through something similar myself. So same I was running my own business 2008, 2009. I was actually on maternity leave with my eldest then. I had my own business. and because of what happened, I too had to walk away and go and get a job, employment. And it took me a while to, exactly like you say, not see it as a failure, but as just a step in the journey. And you learn what you learn, you move on, and here we are now. But I'm interested in your strategies for resilience and how you position that in your mind so that you were able to go back into being a director and all that good stuff.
I think so. It's just looking back. I think in the moment you don't realize it. I suspect. I think probably. So talk about doing individual sports when I was younger.
What kind of sports? What were you into?
So I was a 400-meter runner.
Okay.
So for those of you who aren't aware, that is running as fast as you can for about 250 meters and then dying slowly to the final 150. But I think that in itself taught you a lot of resilience and sort of resistance to. You had to believe in yourself. You had to believe if you lost one race, you could pick yourself up and go and try and win the next one. And that, whether that meant harder training or different approach to the training or something, but you had to believe in yourself. And I don't always see it. I think my wife would probably say you do it more than you realize, and it doesn't seem to phase you, whether that's just putting a brave face on it sometimes. But I think the hardest point was probably picking myself up from leaving Shoal, having to walk away from Shoal and doing contracting, because even then you're sort of still on your own a bit. I took my time to go and find another role rather than just jump into the first one that presented itself, and thought hard, because if I'm going to do this, it's not like, yes, I've got to pay the bills, but I want to go somewhere where I can make a difference rather than just getting a job. And actually that's generally forced me personally away from the big boys, the sort of PwCs, Deloittes of the world, and go and try and make a real difference in a small business. And so again, when I joined Oakland, that was probably 18 months of planning to do that move.
Okay.
Rather than I need to leave and I've got to do it within the next 3 months sort of thing. So it's taught me to be quite, not cautious, I guess, just thoughtful of where you move. And I think it's always good to move, not when you need to, but when you want to. So I think if you're at the point where you feel like you've got to move because you're upset or you're disappointed, you're going to make the wrong move. Actually almost plan your move ahead of when you think you might need to do it. So yeah, I can't really put my finger on where that resilience has come from, other than probably having to have it a bit inbuilt as part of doing sport when I was younger.
Yeah, that makes total sense. What about your why? Why do you do what you do? You mentioned making a difference there.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's probably changed and morphed a bit. I've always had, a bit like why I set up Shoal. So I've always had this burning desire to build something, and build something I'm proud of. I think what does that look like has probably changed. So I think historically that was probably, as a young kid, that was probably a bit more money motivated, as it is with a lot of people. And then it moved to becoming like product orientated, so wanting to build a product, just because then you've got a thing.
Yes.
And actually that thing can be a product, or it can be a team or a business. And so I think for me, what does that success look like, and why do I do it, is I'd love to be able to, we're not day to day, we're not often far away from this, but sometimes be able to sit back and look at the team that we've built and go, look at how successful that team is without us or without me. That is a big drive. If that team almost needs us less and less, that's a sign that we're doing the right things. And again, it's as a management team rather than me on my own. So yeah, that's become a much bigger driver, to be able to go, we've taken the reins at Oakland we've sort of transitioned from the management team. So our MD at the time has left the business. He's retired, so that's sort of natural progression. The new wave of directors have sort of taken that on, reinvented and moved it into its next phase. So if we're able to do the same and hand it over to whoever is in the future in a better place than we took it on, then that's a good thing.
Absolutely. So we're talking about having an impact, leaving a legacy, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thinking about leadership, what are the most important leadership qualities in your opinion?
So I try hard, don't always get it right, I would have to say. I think as a leader, it's about trying to get the best out of people. It is sometimes, but it's not really telling them what to do or always telling them how to do it. Sometimes you do need to do that. I think if you can, and I was having this conversation with one of my guys the other day, it's almost as a leader that you want to build in a reflected glory to the team that you work with. You've heard of the phrase, it's lonely at the top. The director isn't there, or the team leader is not there necessarily to get the praise. It's the team. And so if you can bring out the best in that team, it's justified, but I think that's then teaching them how to stand up for themselves and how for them to be resilient as well. And often certainly in our projects, I can't go and teach them how to be a better coder or a better developer or a better data scientist. God, if that we'd be out of a job if I tried to do that. What I can teach them to be is a better communicator or a better negotiator or a better salesperson. And actually, all of those things are important generally in most people's day-to-day job. Just because it's called sales and you're called a developer doesn't mean you don't need to think about it. And so it's trying to build quite rounded people and helping them to understand where they need to turn certain skills on or dial certain skills down depending on the situation. And I think that again for me leads into or goes back to the legacy bit. If you can bring out the best in that team, it leaves that legacy, so in time you can walk away from it and they can take over.
Do you think, sorry,
no, go on.
I was just going to say, do you think your leadership style has evolved somewhat? Because you were talking before about more about individual glory, and now it seems that it's evolved. Do you think that's partly in line with becoming a parent? You grow in that legacy and nurturing and passing
probably
on the skills.
I'd say I think I've probably become less bothered about it being about me. So doing a 400-meter run, if you win, the only person who gets that glory is you, not the coach or not your support or anything like that. I think these days, I guess I'm more comfortable and recognise that the praise to a director comes from the team doing well. If I've done something in the business but the team can't deliver it or the team has failed, that's sort of irrelevant. A business is only going to succeed by the overall team doing a good job. I think you're right. It's sort of nurturing that team to get there and also to be proud of themselves, and not always look to the director or the team leader even. So it's less or not necessarily just about the director. It might be the tech lead or the PM as well. It's not always to look to them, sort of be confident in your own decisions or your own actions sometimes. And I think that's tough a lot of the time for youngsters these days, is sort of being a bit more self-conscious and self-confident. And I think it's trying to teach them that resilience, pick yourself up and get going again. Not every project goes perfectly. I take a lot of things still to heart and I'm quite passionate about what I do. And so I've had to learn to, I guess, not temper that passion, but you use different skills to put that passion to best endeavors rather than letting it bubble over. And probably in the past it was more if you're not going to do it in the way I want to do it, I'm going to take it off you. And that again is not a good leadership skill to have. And so giving people a bit more free rein and supporting them in getting to an answer or delivering something, I think is a much better approach.
I think a lot of them have been shining out or become self-evident as you've been talking today, but what are your core values?
So we have a set of core values as a business. They've largely been designed as part of what we all believe in as people, and I think the reason that we are currently in a good place and going from strength to strength is because they do actually reflect each of us as individuals as well as a team. So as a business, our values are around tenacity, passion, curiosity, being technically excellent. And so I think people get hung up on technically excellent being just about technology. I would say one of our best technical people is actually one of our directors, who is a expert in sort of enterprise grade process mapping and process understanding. It's nothing to do with technology, but technically he understands that better than anybody I know. And so he is technically excellent in that space. I think for me personally, out of that, the tenacity and passion are probably what stand out for me personally. The reason over time the business has moved me more into a sort of business development and almost like front of house role probably is because of my tenacity. I don't give up easily, almost to the point of stalking. But I will keep going and push hard to win work or to make things happen or to create partnerships with other organizations. And that's probably stood me apart, I think.
Can you give me an example of that tenacity? Not the stalking bit, but
yeah. I think there's been, so without naming names,
of course, keep it confidential,
partnerships that have taken the best part of 18 months to 2 years to sort of get to a point of fruition. And even now it's not touch and go, but I think you still have a way to go, but these things take time. And in our sort of line of work, generally in normal circumstances, our sales cycle can be 6 to 12 months. So I think where other people would just give up and go, well, it's not worth chasing, I will keep chasing. If I believe there's something of value to both parties, it's only going to work if there's something in it for both, or however many parties there are. But if I believe there is, that needs work to make happen. And winning work, there's been a couple of projects where they were almost dripping away, or the conversation had stopped, and you just got to keep chasing, or just keeping in contact with people. A lot of our work is not. You talked before about timing. I think that's just, it's often about having good conversations with people that may not be what they need right now, but if you've made an impression and you've had a sensible grown-up conversation, they will remember you when they do need some help, and hopefully that's they'll pick up the phone. And I think that helps with a number of people have said I give across a genuine passion to what I do. And I think that helps you then be remembered. If I'm just seen as almost reading off a crib sheet of this is our sales pattern, I've got to get all these, people see through that. I think there is these days I think there has to be a real level of honesty and humility in that whole sort of relationship building and engagement process, whether that be with staff, suppliers, customers, whatever. People see through all of that these days, and if you're trying to follow the sales pitch crib sheet, I think people just turn off really quickly. There's an honesty and a humility, I think, that is important, and I think that certainly for a leader, recognizing that, and good ones I see use that as part of their emotional intelligence in terms of how they deal with people.
So that belief in what you do and the love for what you do really, really shines through, and it's lovely to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Our audience is interested in growing emotionally intelligent, authentic businesses.
Yeah.
Which is what we're talking about here, isn't it? You know, anybody, you've got to believe in what you do. You've got to have a passion for it, and you've got to genuinely believe that you're doing something extraordinary.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on authenticity and emotional intelligent approach?
So I think authenticity as a start, I think it's one of those that's really easy to say,
Mm,
and I think it's quite hard to get it right. So it can come over as people trying to be authentic by telling a story, and actually, if you're not careful, that story is then almost sounds like a rehearsed story,
mm-hmm,
which then to me doesn't sound authentic. Um, I think it's having, it probably comes a bit to the emotional intelligence and the empathy, but knowing what parts of that story to tell when, and to who, and to know who is going to care about that part of the story. You know, there's people out there that I could start going off about, you know, running 400 meters when I was a kid, and they wouldn't give two hoots.
mm,
And so you're going to lose them immediately. And although I might think that that's me being authentic and giving a bit of myself to the conversation, if they don't care, it doesn't really matter. So
mm,
I think for leaders particularly, and as if you're in early stages of growing a business, that authenticity has to be with that emotional intelligence. So you know what story to tell when. I think it's always good to have stories and real world stories, because that's a great way of bridging a relationship and again, breaking the ice.
mm-hmm,
But as long as that's done with the understanding and the reading of the situation as to whether the person's going to be receptive to it, and that
mm,
comes with experience, or whether people are good at emotional intelligence and people aren't. It can be worked on, but yeah, if you can read the room, read the individual, that's, I think, really important. And being honest, I think I've learned the hard way sometimes of, you've got to call out yourself in front of somebody if you don't know the answer, or you've messed up. Or even if you think you've done something not as well as you could. There's a pitch we did to a client probably about a year ago, and we walked out genuinely thinking, oh, we balls that up.
mm,
No, that wasn't our best pitch, and we were going to leave it. And I actually rang the client the next day and said, look, I just want to be clear. That's not normally how we do these things. And they were like, well, what do you mean? So, well, I know we can give a much better impression of ourselves. I don't think we quite hit it. I don't think we covered off the areas we wanted to cover off. And I don't know whether the opportunity is there, but we'd love to come back and talk to you again. And interestingly, he said, well, first of all, I've never heard anybody be that honest and offer that after a pitch.
mm.
But funnily enough, we wanted to give you the work anyway. So that's just sort of reinforced our belief in we're giving the work to the right people. And we mulled over that. That was quite a scary call to make, to go, we messed up, can we have another go? And that was with quite a big client. So sometimes that wouldn't work. Again, it's reading the room. You might have a
Sure.
client that would just almost have the complete opposite reaction to that sort of conversation. So yeah, I think that's become quite an important part of what I think is important as a leader. And I think what you've got to bear in mind as you grow a business as well.
Mm.
The thing for me is more than clients, staff to see through that. And if you're not authentic to your staff, you don't get any respect from them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but what's your thoughts on vulnerability?
So I'd say the same. I think that's part of honesty and having integrity. I'd say I'm pretty open with my staff. Everything from, I've taken the kids into work before, they know about my hobbies, and I'll be generally pretty honest around if I've messed up, and I'll hold my hands up to that and say, yeah, that's my bad. I didn't do this or I didn't do that. I think sometimes also going, but we also need to recognise as a team that we didn't do that particularly well, or as a team, well done. You've completely outshone me, and you've done a fantastic job, and don't be afraid to do either, I think. So I think it's a very fine balancing act as a leader to be too vulnerable versus showing enough that makes you human. Because, and again, I still getting used to this, but you have to recognize that often the staff are there because you're there, and they look up to you, and they you'll have staff members that want to be in your position in the future, and the fine line is of seeing you too vulnerable or seeing you suffering can have a negative effect on the team, but can also, again, it's showing your human side. So I don't think that's true of the tenacity piece. We've started to see, because of the current climate, I don't know about you, but my day has extended. So I try to finish at 5 or thereabouts, so I can spend the evening with the kids and do dinner and all that sort of stuff. I then start work again at 8:30 and tend to work through till whenever. And it only takes your staff to see that a couple of times to start to believe that's the norm. And that's really, I think, quite dangerous. And I think leaders need to recognize that just because it's your business or you're in charge doesn't mean you should be working all hours. I recognize that, as being a business owner, there is an element of 24/7 to it, as I'm sure you know. I think you have to be really careful of that, accidentally bleeding into the way we work around here, because you will disincentivize people. I think we've got a really good balance where I think most of our staff don't see it as a job. Their learning will go into out of hours. They will do stuff at weekends. They recognize sometimes we've got deadlines to hit, and they will dig in deep. But I think if we can, we'll say, well, this week's been a winner. You've hit the deliverables. Take Friday afternoon off. And that's got to be true of the directors or the leaders as well as the staff. If I say that to staff and then I carry on working till 9 o'clock on a Friday, that doesn't reinforce that behavior.
Yes, completely devalues it. And it's really interesting to see that level of self-awareness that they will follow your lead in. There's no point just spouting values or need for balance and then working yourself into the ground.
And I think that's the difference between, as a runner, you're not a leader as such. You're an individual and you're pushing and driving, and that's probably what spurred me to set up my own business in the first place. It's very different from being a leader, because you have other people watching you and sort of keeping an eye on your behaviors and all the rest of it. And we employ a very intelligent bunch of people, and you sometimes forget that they're not just intelligent in terms of building really clever data products for our clients. They're just intelligent people, full stop.
Yes.
And they will pick up on the nuances of your behaviors, whether that is seeing you sending an email out at 11:30 at night. So having my staff telling me that I should take a break is never a good thing.
So that sort of leads us on to the penultimate question of what advice you would give yourself from 10 years ago.
I think that's a really hard question to answer. I think that there's a big bit of believing in yourself. So a bit like we were talking about before, that it was hard to walk away from something I'd built.
Yes.
But I wouldn't be here now if I hadn't done that. And I think sort of always be grateful for what you've got at that time, and only sort of worry about what's right ahead of you. I've been probably quite fortunate, or I think I've been quite fortunate in that I've made moves at the right time. I've been in businesses that have sort of taken care of me. I've not followed a corporate route, which comes with its pros and cons, but I've generally sort of done what I've wanted to do. And I think that's partly, and again, it's easy to reflect. You don't necessarily see it at the time, but that resilience and that tenacity to chase the things that you want and believe in yourself. I think the only thing I recognize now more than I did then is actually that reflection. So take time to reflect on where you're at and what you've got in that moment, rather than, as I say, worrying too much about, well, if I do this and then do this, I'll get to this point. Well, you just don't know what's going to happen. You don't know whether there's going to be a global pandemic
Quite.
or whatever. But I think I used to, 10 years ago and before, I used to worry too much about the future, which is really hard as a leader, because you are always worrying about the future, whether it's 3 months time or 6 months time or 5 years time. You can plan for all of that, but you can often only deal with what's in front of you. And being comfortable and confident with that, I think,
yes,
is really hard to get used to. But as our outgoing MD used to say, you can only play with what's on the pitch. I don't know what the world's going to be like in 6 months' time. I can predict, and we can put in various measures, but right now we've got to deal with the work we've got and the people we've got, and make sure they're all happy, and then move forward. But I used to get way too hung up on, could I get the business to this size and then sell it, or could I do this, or what house are we going to have in 5 years' time? And I think it's you could just get lost in the future, rather than actually, it sounds really corny, but sort of living for the now. And my wife would still say that about me now, that I don't worry or take care of the here and now enough. And I think as a leader, that's quite important.
Absolutely. And the final question, Andy, and thank you very much for your time. What's a book or a podcast you couldn't live without? Give us your recommendations.
So other than yours, obviously.
Quite.
Yes. So interestingly, I don't tend to read or listen to many podcasts.
Okay.
The podcasts I've tended to I guess follow have often been outside of work. So they're things that I can use to escape or learn about outside of work stuff. So to talk about passion and technically excellent in terms of our corporate values, that's often about helping people learn and making sure we have a general culture of learning, whether that's in work, outside of work. Our teams or individuals, over Christmas, a number of them built their own mini AI modules of stuff, just because blows my mind, really. But we've challenged ourselves as the directors to go and learn something as well.
Okay.
So one of my things is outside of work is cycling. So as you can see the helmet
yes.
behind here. And so I've been following a number of podcasts to do with cycling. So more big bouncy mountain bikes rather than too much lycra on the road. But I've been doing more and more maintenance. So teaching myself how to actually do the maintenance on the bike rather than take it to a shop. And so a number of the podcasts, and actually, well, a mixture of podcast and YouTube channels has been my go-to recently. To teach myself a new skill, and that's something that's practical that I can put into action as my boys get older. No doubt I will have to look after their bikes. So it would seem quite helpful that Dad can turn his hand to fixing the bike rather than taking it to the shop all the
Absolutely,
time.
You save yourself a fortune.
Fingers crossed. So yeah, I think a couple of work ones have been like, I've used TED in the past, which have been quite good. There's a lot of data ones out there at the moment that I think the danger with some of them are they're becoming a much of muchness. It's harder to find ones that stand out. But yeah, I think I've tried to use that sort of format as a learning platform for things outside of work at the moment. And I think it's been exacerbated by the current situation. It gives me a change in the use of my brain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the greatest entrepreneurs are multi-passionate. They're not just passionate about work. There's a lot of passion out there and curiosity as well. So thank you for not just keeping it to the business world. Well, Andy, that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and best of luck with it all. I'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you very much. I hope the shed doesn't get too hot this afternoon. Take care.